Hello and welcome to another edition of Mosaic, an African American perspective. I'm Deborah Milo. Today we are talking to Montgomery County Councilmember Valerie Ervin. Elected in 2006, Councilmember Ervin is the first African American woman to serve on the council. She has earned a reputation as a strong advocate for the interests of working families and for improving the lives of children through more educational opportunities and proper nutrition. Welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Valerie, you were recently named one of Maryland's top women by the Daily Record, and last year, Washingtonian magazine named you one of Washington's 100 most powerful women. Obviously, winning these awards is quite an honor. Tell us what it means for you to be singled out for such high accolades.
Well, as you can imagine, it was quite a surprise for me to be recognized, especially by the Washingtonian magazine. They only do this honor every 2 years. And so my office got a call, and I couldn't believe it because I was in the company of people like Congresswoman Donna Edwards and business leaders and leaders in medicine. And so I thought, well, what would they think of me, a Montgomery County council member from Montgomery County, Maryland? So it was quite a distinction, and I was so extraordinarily honored. And I think it's just all about the work that I put into this job. When I got elected, I remember thinking to myself that I had already worked at the council. I was a chief of staff for Councilmember George Leventhal, and I got to see the council from the inside out. And I thought, if I ever got an opportunity to serve in this way, how would I serve? And so I got elected and I hit the ground running. And I knew that it was really important for someone like me who was the first, if you can imagine, in 2006, that I was the first African American woman elected, that I knew a lot of eyes were going to be on me. So there was a little bit of pressure there, but I also knew what I wanted to accomplish. And so I had a whole portfolio of ideas about what I could actually do on behalf of citizens. And in my perspective, the most vulnerable of all our citizens are children. So I had an idea from the very beginning what I was going to do to make sure that children had enough to eat, that they had enough to do after school, that there was recreation programs. So I set about putting a focus on small citizens of the county.
I like that, small citizens of the county, because they matter they're very important, and they matter. As I mentioned in my open, you've proven yourself a strong advocate for working families and children. Tell us about some of your initiatives in this regard.
Well, my entrance into politics was when I ran for the Board of Education in 2004. And I raised 2 boys here in Montgomery County public schools. And I knew that there were certain struggles that children of color had that other kids may not experience. And one of the things that I really focused on was the achievement gap. My youngest son, who's now 24, went to Piney Branch Elementary School. And at that time, when he was in the 3rd grade, I found out that there was a test for all 2nd grade students in Montgomery County called the Global Screening Test. And what the Global Screening Test determined was who would be gifted and talented and who would not get that designation. And so after a lot of work, I wasn't the only one involved in this issue of the achievement gap, but I helped to start an organization with some great friends called the Montgomery County Education Forum, and we set about finding out as much about this topic as possible. In my son's elementary school, for example, there were 100% of the white children were designated gifted and talented. And as you know, that's statistically impossible.
Absolutely. So
that there were other things underfoot. So I became very politicized around this issue, and it's a national issue. And so I took up the reins, and I decided to run for the Board of Education to really raise this issue up, because there is a correlation between African American and Latino kids who are not doing well in school and the dropout rate, how many of them are expelled or suspended, and who ends up in the criminal justice system.
Right.
So we have to focus on early interventions, and that is making sure we put money into pre-K services, which I have been a huge advocate for, and that we do all that we can to make sure that everybody's child has the same access to opportunity. And so that's how I actually ended up at the council, and I now chair the council's education committee.
You have had quite a career, to say the least, and it's just amazing to hear how your advocacy has brought you to this point.
Yes.
That's fantastic. Among the county's elected officials, you've been the strongest advocate for universal early education, making preschool and full-day kindergarten available to all the county's children, which, by the way, is phenomenal. Why have you chosen to push so hard for this? And tell me, what impact will this have on the future of education in the county?
Well, pre-K services, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important areas of work that need to be done, not just here in Montgomery County and the state of Maryland, but across the nation. Because having that access to 3, 4, and 5-year-olds to a high-quality pre-K and then high-quality kindergarten is really the key to closing this gap. And we know statistics and studies have shown that if your child has the access to these programs early on, that you see very little of this gap that I was talking about. So this was one of the things I did 5 years ago, was wrote a proposal and ended up getting it passed through the council, where a pre-K school came into Montgomery County from DC, and what they were able to get was a full-day, full-year, wraparound program for all of those children, and it was bilingual, which is very unusual. A very expensive program, but we're trying to expand it because we know that it works. So if we're able to really raise the level of consciousness around how important it is to give these little ones a chance, we will see less dropouts. We can close the gate on the numbers of black boys and Latino boys who go into the juvenile justice system. And at the end of the day, it helps everybody. It helps keep our community safe and well. And so this has been a focus of mine, and we're hoping to spread this message not just here, but around the state of Maryland.
You represent District 5 in Montgomery County, which has traditionally included downtown Silver Spring. And over the past decade, tell me something, no area of the county has been redeveloped like downtown Silver Spring. You've been an advocate for making sure that the people who live in that community had a strong say in reshaping their community. Can that approach be applied as other communities in our county face major development?
There's no question that the most fun I've been having at this job, and I do have a good time doing this, that is bringing in people who have not had any access to any of the land use planning that goes on in this county. It's sort of the little secret we have in Montgomery County, that there's only a handful of people that actually participate when it comes to who gets to decide what your community is going to look like. So in my long ago past, I was a union organizer, and one of the principles that I've learned by doing that work is that you have to really be on the ground where people live. They have to see you, you have to talk to them, you have to bring them in and engage them as much as possible. And my staff and I, they will tell you that they roll their eyes because they say I never take a vacation. But for me, work is not work. And so one of the things we were able to do in Silver Spring was we hired some people to just do outreach. They did outreach in apartment buildings and in neighborhoods that normally have no access to any elected officials. And we were able to turn around some of the conversation on the Purple Line that is supposed to be built that will connect Bethesda to Silver Spring, Silver Spring to College Park. That was a very interesting thing we did there, but we really raised the consciousness of people who would actually use the train and have access, who have to use public transportation. But it was people who don't use public transportation that were fighting against transit options. I also represent the east side of the county, and there are some opportunities in the east side of the county on the border between Prince George's County and Montgomery County where lots of immigrant families live, and we have been engaging with those folks. We had a meeting, a community meeting, and we were able to bring out 130 folks who have never been to a planning meeting ever, and it really changed the dynamic of that exercise. So we want as many people as possible to engage in the future of their community. And I think it makes some people very uncomfortable.
Of course.
That we're trying to change the structure of power. And the new civil rights language, you know, there's a civil rights language that is now bearing itself out in land use and planning, and you know, it's been very interesting to watch the change in this dynamic here in Montgomery County. So we are now majority minority county, but it's not reflected in who's elected. It's not reflected in who's on boards and commissions.
Right.
It's not reflected from the top of the ticket to the bottom of the ticket.
Right.
And I believe that part of my role as an elected official of color, being the only black woman on the council, is to develop a cadre of people who will come behind me, because I only get to occupy the seat. It's not my seat. The seat belongs to the people of the county, but I want to make sure that people are prepared to take up the mantle.
I like what you said, just what you said. You want to be sure that people are prepared to take up the mantle. And you know, many times, you and I both know this, many times the way that's done is by pioneering a process, which you've done.
Yes.
Which you've done. And that's just an incredible opportunity that you have been not only given, but that you're also giving.
Yes.
From my perspective, you're making sure that you're going to leave that legacy so that this can carry on. And
I like that, giving, because I think really being part of this process is all about giving back.
It really is.
If you didn't believe in that philosophy,
right.
Maybe a lot of people don't, but I believe in that philosophy, and I'm at a certain age now.
We just talked about this.
We just talked about that.
This, right.
And when I look behind me, people who are maybe in their 30s and 40s, right. There's a big gap.
Yes, there is.
And I am going to work very hard over the next few years to make sure we fill that gap with people who are ready and willing to take that on. Because in the state of Maryland, I just had this conversation last night. I was at a colleague's house, and we were doing a fundraiser for an organization called Emerge, which is to train women to run for office. And in the state of Maryland, the percentage of women elected in the state is pretty abysmally low. And so there's so much work that has to be done, but I feel like we're at a crossroads right now, as we see this huge demographic change that's exploding on the country. It's exploding also here in the state of Maryland. So I feel very fortunate to be here at this time.
We're fortunate that you are here at this time. We're glad about that, to say the least. It's just so wonderful to hear you talk about the work that you've done in advocacy, and then it's continuing on. Tell me the name of the organization again. You were just talking about teaching women to...
It's called Emerge.
Emerge.
America. And Maryland is one of 13 states now that has an Emerge organization in it. And they are working very diligently to have their first training, where they're going to have 25 women. It's like a 7-week program. So if anybody's listening and you're interested, you can go on Emerge's website. But this is part of the work that myself, my colleague Nancy Navarro, and Nancy Florine, the only 3 women who serve on the council, we do know that women are 51% of the electorate, but we are not represented in the numbers that we should be, but neither are women of color. So we have a lot of work to do.
We do have a lot of work to do, and we do it by working together. I like the way that you said that. It's so important that we put ourselves in a position to be able to appreciate and take advantage of those opportunities. We really do. So we're going to talk more about some of these things coming up in our next segment. For those of you who have just tuned in, you are watching Mosaic, an African American perspective. We're talking with County Councilmember Valerie Ervin. We're going to take a quick break. I hope you will stay with us for the second half of our show.
Today is Saturday. Salad on Saturday, fruit on Friday, throw a ball Thursday. Water Wednesday, touch your toes Tuesday. Let's move Monday, swap us next Sunday.
60 minutes of physical activity a day and eating well can help get your child healthy. So keep them active and eating well every day. Get ideas, get involved, get going at letsmove.gov. That's letsmove.gov.
Serving your community is a great feeling. The Montgomery County Volunteer Center can connect you to hundreds of volunteer opportunities available throughout the area. Are you a student, senior, professional, community group, or business looking to serve? Simply visit our website to select what's right for you and get great ideas from past projects with our volunteer toolkits, or share a success story of your own. The Montgomery County Volunteer Center. Make an impact in your community. Where will you serve?
Welcome back to Mosaic, an African American perspective. We're talking with Montgomery County Councilmember Valerie Ervin. Okay, Valerie, we've been having such a good conversation, having such a good time. There's a couple questions I want to talk with you about. Working from within is one way to get things accomplished. However, you've reached beyond Montgomery County's borders to forge relationships with leaders on all levels of outside the county. Prince George's County Executive Rushern Baker, Howard County Executive Ken Ullman, and Congresswoman Donna Edwards. Tell me, what do you learn from those experiences, and what can you bring back to the county to make it more efficient?
Well, I love that question because I think as we move forward in time, it becomes less important that we represent a county and more important that we represent a region.
Okay.
And so a lot of the issues that we're taking up around the region impact all the region the same way. Mm-hmm. So when I sit down and talk to Rushern Baker, who I adore, by the way, he's just a super person. Mm-hmm. We talk about the impacts that boundaries and the way our constituents don't see boundaries.
Right.
So, you know, if you live in Prince George's County, you might go to the hospital in Montgomery County,
right,
like at Venice Hospital.
Right.
So there's a lot of back and forth between counties across jurisdictional lines in terms of how people access health care. I just had a meeting with Muriel Bowser from Ward 4 in the District of Columbia, same issues around transportation. And on our side of Eastern Avenue, which is the dividing line between DC and Montgomery County, there are a lot of issues about parking, if you can imagine, because there's so much new development going on in downtown Silver Spring. When it gets to over the DC line, that development is impacting those single home owners on the other side of Eastern Avenue.
I see.
People are parking in their neighborhoods. And another interesting thing is dogs, if you can. So all these apartments are going up in downtown Silver Spring,
right,
and people can bring their pets. So there's no dog park. So where do people walk their dogs? They walk them in the neighborhoods,
right, of course,
on Muriel Bowser's side of the border. So we laugh about this, but if you live there, it's a serious issue.
Of course.
But transportation impacts all of the region. And so meeting with Ken Ullman and Rushern Baker and Muriel Bowser, who is actually a transportation expert, she used to work for the county in DOT. We all talk about how the jurisdictions all sort of blend across these boundaries that really don't exist for our residents. So it's been really great getting to know them on a personal level. They're all really, really smart people. And the thing about it is we all have so much in common on a personal level, because a lot of people who run for public office have always done things their whole life that sort of prepared them for it, even though they didn't think about it as they were doing it. So it's really funny. So talking to Ken Ullman, he was always engaged in student government in high school. So was I. So was Rushern. So was Donna.
Right.
When we went to college, we all did the same thing.
Yes.
Got involved in student politics on campus.
Right.
So there was always some seed in there.
Of course.
I never thought I would run for office, but I was always engaged. And so there are so many things that are similar in all of our backgrounds, and so it's really fun to get together and talk with them.
It's amazing, because when I hear you say that, it reminds me of, I was having a conversation with friends over dinner recently, and we were discussing how all of us are now public servants to some extent. So you're right, we all have so many, there's a common thread there amongst everyone, so I understand that. We were talking earlier, and laughing quite frankly, about you growing up in a military family and how you traveled around the world and lived military bases in a lot of countries. Tell us about that a little bit, and what was it like, and how did it shape you to who you are today? Well,
we're segueing out of that conversation about the leaders in the region, but I have to tell you, my very dear friend, Congresswoman Donna Edwards and I, our fathers actually met in the Air Force, and they were stationed on Okinawa in the early 50s, before they even met our moms. And then some years later, they were both stationed at an Air Force base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I was about 11 or 12, and turns out that the Edwards lived across the street from us. So I've known Donna since like 7th grade.
Right.
And so it's just really funny because we've sort of followed each other around the country.
Right.
And she ended up here in Maryland before I got here.
Okay.
And so it's very interesting how our paths intersected in politics. She decided she would run for Congress, and I've been on the county council. But Rashern Baker comes from a military family, Air Force brat. And we talked about what's similar among the three of us in terms of our background. And I'll have to say, if you're moving around from school to school to school, one of the things you learn is how to build relationships, even as a child. You know, it's politics, even as a child, right? You learn how to go into the school. You sort of scope out what's what, like what kid in class is the one you got to know.
Right.
You know, you learn how to deal with adults.
That's true.
It's very interesting the way you learn to navigate. And so I was one of 5 children, the second born. I have an older brother. And I was always the leader in the family, although very shy. But I was the one that led. And so I take that with me. I mean, it was one of the most powerful things I learned as a child, having to always move around and be the new kid. So you learn how to behave. You learn how, you figure out what the rules are, the spoken rules and the unspoken rules. It's all politics.
It is all politics. You're right. You're right.
And so we laugh about it now, but we all sort of learned very similar ways to survive it, because it was tough. You know, I'm not saying it was always fun.
Right.
But you have a similar background too. It wasn't easy.
No, not at all. Just understanding how children respond to those kind of situations, it's very challenging.
Yes.
Very, very challenging. And whether or not, your parents moved around the world or around the country, you had to learn new things. You had to learn, sometimes maybe in your case, new languages even.
Absolutely. I have found that my background has helped me feel comfortable wherever I go.
Excellent.
I never met anybody that was a stranger. I can sit down and talk to anybody about anything at any time.
Right.
And my mother was like that, and she used to embarrass us. Now I'm that way.
Well, the old expression is that we become our mothers after a certain period of time.
Don't we? Isn't that the truth?
Tell us a little bit about how you became such a strong supporter for working for families and the needs for children.
Well, I grew up in a pretty large family, but my mother had a huge family. She was one of 11 children. And my mother had 1 brother and 9 sisters.
Oh my goodness.
And someone asked me this a long time ago about, working women and, your thoughts on, women working while they're raising kids. And I said, I know no different.
Right.
All of my aunts worked. They worked in nursing homes. They weren't educated people, but they were hard workers. They worked in nursing homes. They cooked for people. They took care of people. They worked in people's homes. I've never known a woman in my life that didn't work.
Right.
But I also know the struggles that came with not having enough. And so I always grew up thinking that I was going to work somehow to make it easier for people who were just doing the best that they could, working as hard as they knew how, but it was never enough. And so I feel a kindred spirit with my constituents who are struggling in this tough economy. And as I said earlier, especially the little ones, through no fault of their own. So I am working very hard with communities around the issue of food and the fact that a lot of people do not have enough food, and this issue of food security is a huge one. And that issue is, even though you might have 2 working parents, they have to make decisions. Am I going to pay the rent this month?
That's right.
Am I going to buy medicine this month? Am I going to put gas in the car this month? And how much is left over for food is usually what happens. And then what people are doing is they're trying to figure out any way they can to keep the bellies of the children full. But that doesn't always mean with good food. It just means whatever keeps them full.
Yes.
So I implemented the community gardens program here about 3.5 years ago, and the gardens took off in a huge way, and we're hoping to expand it even more. I think there's about 13 gardens. It started with 1 in Tacoma Park. And we're doing all that we can to work with area farmers and organic farmers on bringing produce to neighborhoods that don't have access to fresh fruits and vegetables because they're really expensive. So we're doing a lot of work to sort of open people's eyes up about this issue of food and nutrition and how at the end of the day, I believe it's a right of all human beings to have enough food to eat.
Absolutely.
And even here in Montgomery County, which is known to be one of the wealthiest communities in the country,
Right.
we have 44,000 kids on free and reduced meals, which is an indicator of poverty, and that's a low reported number. We think it's much larger than that. So we are dealing with a broad community, a huge community that doesn't have enough. So if I can't do that work here, where can I do that work?
Right.
And so you started off by asking me a question, and I'm sure I went all the way around the world with it.
That's okay.
But I
That's
do
okay.
want people who are watching this to really know that if you grow up in a family that always has as its mantra, always give back, I will always be doing this work, whether I'm elected to do it or whether I'm going to volunteer.
That's right.
I will always do that because there's so many people well-deserving that need our help.
My parents used to tell us growing up, volunteering is the best way to pay yourself back.
Yes.
Because when you give of yourself, you give of the very best that you need to. So it's good to hear you say that. I appreciate that very much. You've been a strong supporter of equality for families, including marriage equality for gay and lesbian families too. Tell us your feelings when the Senate approved the Civil Marriage Protection Act this year.
Well, you do know in African American communities across the country, this is a very, very tough issue.
It's sensitive, yes.
Because in our own communities, we haven't really dealt with the issue,
That's
number
right.
one. And I think we still need to do that,
Right.
and we need to heal our community around the issue of gay and lesbians inside our own community. I was asked to make a video by Marylanders for Marriage Equality, and I said absolutely. I didn't blink an eye, because for me it has everything to do with civil rights and human rights, and everybody deserves the opportunity for a family. And so I believe very strongly in that, and I sort of see the parallel tracks that this movement is taking, the same way we did in the civil rights movement. But also, you know, another issue, you may or may not be wanting to ask me this, but I'm going to throw that out there anyway, and that is on the DREAM Act, which I am very supportive of and have been a stalwart fighter on behalf of all the Dreamers. And so there's so much going on in this community around issues of civil rights, whether they impact those of us in the African American communities or not. I think that people need to start to draw the parallel between the rights of all people, that if there are people out there who still have their rights impinged, ultimately it affects our rights as well. So
Absolutely.
that's where I am on those issues.
Absolutely. I cannot tell you how fun it has been to have you on Mosaic today. We've had such a wonderful time, and I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. So we'll have to definitely get together and do this next time.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Okay, that sounds good. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for today. I want to thank my guest, Councilmember Valerie Ervin, for taking time to talk with us today. I'm Deborah Milo. Please join us again next month for another edition of Mosaic, an African American Perspective.
Did you know there are more than 10,000 county government phone numbers? Now there is only one number you need to remember for non-emergency calls: 311. MC 311 is Montgomery County government's new online and telephone information system. Need information? Have a problem or complaint? Trying to locate a county government facility? Call 311. The call center is open Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. The website is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Remember, call 311 to get it done.